Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Out of This World. I'm Jamie Hanshaw, and I'm back with Rachel Wilson, superstar of the internet. And today is cool because this is the first show that we have that was a request from a fan. They said, if I sponsor your show and I send you some materials, will you study them and put it on your channel? And I said, of course. And what she wanted us to talk about was birth control and how dangerous it was. And I said, of course, send me all you got. And this packet came and it's full of materials by one of my favorite YouTube creators that is an Orthodox priest, and that is Father Cosmas. And I love his channel. His lectures are lengthy and full of wisdom. And so he has put together this packet about, I'm not going to say the words because you know why, but I'll hold them up. This and this, all these books. And Rachel and I poured over this and we took some notes and we got a great show about birth control. But first, I want to give you some announcements. I have a new show on Rockfin, exclusive content, all crazier than here, if you can even imagine. It's farther out of this world. It's called Conspiracy Science Theater, and the format of the show is just a book report. So I read crazy esoteric books and I take notes and spill all of the tea of the occultists and the globalists and more. So look
Oh my
for
gosh,
that.
I'm gonna go subscribe immediately. That sounds amazing.
My first show was the John Coleman book, Committee of 300. And then my second show is going to be Kurt Barker about cannibalism, blood drinking, and high adept Satanism.
Oh
So
my gosh,
yeah,
I'm
it's
so
going to be
excited.
great.
Be so good. I can't wait.
Yeah, we are having this conference. Is going to be the bomb. It's going to have all these cool people that you want to come see. This is in conjunction with Courtney Turner, and Rachel's going to be there, and Alex Zeck, Mel K, Kathy O'Brien, we know her, Kevin Jenkins, Jay Dyer. I'm on this poster.
Yay!
I'm going to give a talk. It's called Out of the Broom Closet, about witchcraft in Hollywood. Owen Schroyer's going to be there, and so many other cool people. You don't want to miss that. That's June 3rd and 4th, and I'm going to put a link where you can buy tickets on this show. It's called Rebels for a Cause. So if you want to just look it up, www.rebelsforacause.com. June 3rd and 4th in Nashville. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, that's gonna be big fun, and there's so much packed into that event, which is why I'm gonna be there, just watching and spectating and enjoying all of the amazing people who are gonna be talking and even doing some performing. I think there's musicians and comedians and stuff mixed in there too. So
Yeah,
it should be like tons of info, but also really entertaining. So hopefully we'll get to meet a lot of you there.
it's going to be a variety show of infotainment, exactly like you
Yeah.
said, not dry, weird. Well, maybe it will be weird, but it will be interesting.
Yes.
So this thing of birth control, it really hits home because this is something that I feel like has made a huge negative impact in my life. I'm actually right now just recovering from a second surgery that I've had to have because of problems with my reproductive system. So I'm going to kind of use that as like the story that goes along with our information here, because Rachel brought all her great stuff from her book about the um, origins of the people that created the pill in the first place. So that's going to get weird. And of course, it's going to be degenerate feminists and Malthusians and Fabians and all those other,
All our favorite people.
yeah, usual suspects, right?
Yeah, it totally is.
So when I was about 19 years old, I my family never had health insurance, so I kind of was able to avoid doctors and stabbies for most of my young and adult life, just because we couldn't afford it. Which is a good thing, it's like providence in a way because you don't get your checkups and you don't get what they recommend to you. But somehow they got their meat hooks in me when I turned like 20 and I got like some kind of job that offered, you can go to the doctor now. So I did. I started going to the doctor and I told him, my periods are very painful. What do you say? And they just opened the Pandora's box of tests and pills and hormones and stabs. And it was kind of horrific, but I trusted that, you could just like reduce my cramps. I didn't know that there was other, natural ways to just relieve pain and magnesium and turmeric
Yeah.
and just the things that I do now. But back then, what was it, 2000 maybe? It's just like around Y2K.
Right.
So the internet wasn't really that huge. You didn't get a lot of health information, stuff like that on the internet. So what he did was he started me on the pills, but he told me to skip the placebo pill
Mm-hmm.
and just continually take this so that I never had a period at all. And he said, well, you have endometriosis, so we're going to take some biopsies of your uterus, which is super painful, and they don't give you any pain med. It's called a colposcopy.
Yes, I've had those.
Yeah, so they go in and they take a chunk out of like 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and send it to the lab and, see if it comes back abnormal or whatever. And that was super painful. And then a couple months later, he said, well, I think we should just, shut down the whole system altogether.
Wow.
And so he gave me some kind of shot. I mean, I was sweating in the office, and the needle that he pulled out, it looked like a rocket ship to me. I mean, it had to be this long because it goes in your bum. And it was a lot of serum or whatever. But you just trust them,
Yeah.
right? And so I got that, and I never had a period for like a year. But I did have menopause symptoms.
Oh.
So the hot flashes, mood swings, crying, nausea, all of that. And I remember the first time I even took the birth control pills, like the first couple days I started taking them, I would get super nauseous and feel like I was going to puke. And he's like, well, just take them before you go to bed then, and that you'll ride out the nausea while you're sleeping. I was like, okay. But I just wish I'd never even met that person
I'm
at
sure.
all, because I feel like I was a lab rat, and I feel like I was part of this like eugenics program. And here's the kicker. So I went through years with this doctor of all of these treatments and hormonal birth control. And I moved away from that area and I didn't see him anymore. And I went off everything because I was like learning about conspiracies and, getting a little bit wiser about the medical industry and how your body can heal itself and it knows what you need. And I came back and I heard through, the grapevine that, did you hear that Dr. So-and-so went to prison for molesting 12 people?
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, I didn't hear that. I thought he was a kind old man. To me, he seemed like Papa Smurf, right? But so I was putting all these pieces together. I'm like, yeah, he's probably a creeper. If 12 people come against you and with enough evidence to put you in prison, then
Yeah.
that's bad news bears. So I'm still dealing with the after effects of what all of that did to me. In about 2011, I had an emergency surgery to remove 5 cysts because one had broken. That was super painful.
Yeah.
And then just this last month, like I felt some cyst activity going on. So I had the ultrasound and they're like, yeah, it's definitely, there's a lime size one and a walnut size one in the right side. And there's like 2 almond size ones on the left. So we're going to go in and get those out. So they just had to end up taking the whole right side out ovary and everything because it was just damaged beyond repair. But the left one should take over, they said, and it should be fine. I'm not in menopause or anything like that. So my hormones are going to be okay. But if I go back in time, I would never put one of those things in my mouth. And I encourage you guys, if you are on them right now, please stop. If you are using tampons, please stop because toxic shock syndrome is terrible. And they put bleaches and titanium dioxide in your tampons and some maxi pads.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Just because they think that shiny white products sell better.
Yeah. So they bleach your toilet paper and your maxi pads and your tampons, and you're putting that and absorbing all of those chemicals right into a place that is very susceptible to
Tampering,
disease.
like to like hormonal endocrine disruptors and things like that.
Exactly. And the perfume is a big one too. So if you
Yeah.
even buy the perfumed tampons, that's even worse. And then we see,
Also, what an absurd idea. That's like scented garbage bags to me. Like, why?
I hate those too.
Why do they want to perfume everything? I won't even buy stuff to put on my face that has perfume in it.
Well,
And that's hard enough to find perfume-free lotion or moisturizer. So you end up doing like a lot of oils and natural stuff because everything is fragranced and everything has all this crazy stuff in it.
yeah. So birth control doesn't just affect your hormones, it affects your mind.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
we learned a lot from these books and the way that they work is we're going to talk about, do they cause a bobos? Do they prevent a pregnancy or do they terminate one?
Right.
Right. So before we get into that, I found these funny pictures about drugs and the pharmaceutical industry and just like how this goes back to, a long way back and just taking pills for everything that you need.
Yeah.
And it's so I found these old ads and this one is for Nervine. Oh, and it's funny because they're always wanting women to take pills to be calmer,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And,
So you won't be upset and you won't give anyone a hard time and you won't
oh,
have feelings anymore. So you
there
can
was
just be
even
quiet.
one. Yes, yes, no more feelings, Sombitol. And there was even one about douching with Lysol, right?
Oh my gosh.
Because your pH balance is so out of whack because you don't know how to take care of yourself because you've been lied to by the pharmaceutical industry that
Well,
you need
yeah.
all of these crazy things. Of course, you're gonna like have weird smells because your body is off.
Yes.
So this one it says, it's no fun to live with a wife with nerves. Take Dr. Miles' Nervine tablets.
Oh my
Do you see
gosh.
that?
How fun.
Yeah. So, um, these women are impatient, hard to get along with. They're subject to nervous headaches, irritable spells, indigestion. And then look at when now she can cook breakfast again on drugs.
Oh, good. So it's the mommy's little helper era of take
Yeah.
all the pills. Yeah. And
Um,
I think that, I mean, there was definitely a shift when the Rockefeller Foundation realized that with their corner on the petroleum market, they could make pharmaceuticals.
yes.
So it was like make a pill for everything and market it and make a ton of money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is for more denine. She's happy.
Wow.
It says you can't set her free, but you can help her feel less anxious. Serax oxazepam. So she's a prisoner of her chores. See that? It's not
That's
focusing.
crazy. Yeah, I see it. I can
Yeah.
see it. What?
So she's just like a little scullery maid and she hates her life, you know.
Oh, I'll take a
But
pill and I'll feel
yeah, take a pill.
better.
Um, this is funny. When she overreacts to any situation, take Mebarol, sedation without sedative days.
Great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, this is really like everything we're talking about right now is part of the medicalization of health, which is a direct consequence of the Rockefeller Foundation. Like
Yes.
they are the ones who made health into a medicalized. So birth is medicalized, family planning is medicalized, everything, every problem you have now is medicalized. Mental health became medicalized when it never was before. It was considered like a health for your soul. Like
Mhm.
psychology literally means like study of the soul, and it became this medicalized industry where it was like every little mood problem you have, or if you feel sad or any feeling you have that's not convenient, there's a pill for that.
Mhm.
And now, I mean, everything is medicalized, and that's what you just showed is like, oh, you have a problem, take a pill, it'll fix it.
I don't have it handy, but I made a fake ad in my very first book that I don't sell anymore. It was just like an ad like this, but I called it Zombitol.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you have feelings? Take Zombitol.
Get
But
rid of those pesky feelings.
yeah, here's one for Premarin, and this is for older ladies. I guess it says help keep her this way, smiling into her old age. This was
Oh
really
boy.
weird. One of the first ads for Xanax, guess what's on it?
Uh-huh.
We
Butterflies.
know what monarch butterflies mean, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not just a fluke because here's another one for Xanax. So,
um
plot
That's
thickens,
concerning. Well, I
right?
bet you, well, that makes a lot of sense given what we know about how many drugs were tested in mind control programs.
Exactly.
Most of the major like psych drugs came out of very MK Ultra and other devious human experimentation programs.
Yeah. Look at this
So,
terrifying one for Xanax. It's all these
oh,
faces, all the voices that you hear. I don't know. It's just weird.
that's really creepy.
Oh, here's one. Pregnancy can be made a happier experience with Milltown. So even drugs for pregnant women.
What? Milltown? I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to look that one up. That's interesting.
Here's one. It's in the menopause transition without tears. Milprem promptly relieves emotional distress with helping control the physical symptoms.
I'm interested what's in these. I bet a lot of them were like opioids and barbiturates and stuff like that based on the time period. I bet
Yeah.
that's what a lot of it was.
Yeah. Oh, and here's Milltown for children. What's to be
Huh.
learned about Milltown from 50 studies with children? So tranquilizers for kids.
Well, and now we have like a startling number of kids on psych drugs,
Hmm.
you know.
Now she can cope thanks to Butasol, daytime sedative for everyday emotional stress. And it's always these housewives.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yes, and this is a
leave
trope
it to
that
Beaver.
bothers me. This bothers me so much because when I am debating feminists are talking about, that kind of propaganda, it's always like, well, you want to go back to the 50s when every housewife was on a bunch of drugs, and it's like that's not because women hated their lives. It's because of marketing and propaganda that
Hmm.
convinced people that if you have a bad day or a bad month or you're going through something difficult or like all the normal things that you go through in life that teach you to emotionally cope, you learn that
Or,
through the experience, and it tries to just like fix it with pills.
well, yeah, or we're learning now you could have parasites, you could
Yeah.
have mold toxicity, or you could just be surrounded by assholes and need to like
Yeah.
cleanse your friend family palate and you get away from abusive people.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
there's all kinds of actual problems that you could just be band-aiding with pills to make you feel better
yeah.
with drugs. And then you saw that with like a lot of celebrities in the 50s, 60s, 70s where the doctors are prescribing them this same kind of stuff, and it makes them very controllable. And so like if they're being used and worked to death and exploited, it's like, "Oh, you're upset about being exploited, take all these pills and that'll make it better, and it's
Hmm.
easier to control them." So it makes sense that they would want the general population to also be easier to control and make them more complacent and things like that as well. So there's like a lot of different motives for why they would want that. But yeah, it's like the over medicalization of women's health and reproductive system. And once we get into that, we'll see all the propaganda they use to make women think that yeah, like normal reproductive things are like a problem. I have four daughters, and that's what they're always wanting to do. Like it's really tough to take them to the doctor because as soon as they start menstruating, they want to talk to them privately. They
Hmm.
want to ask them, questions about their period. And it's like, one of my daughters is 14 and it's still kind of irregular. Now, I know now at 42, that's pretty normal. It's pretty normal to have like some irregularity for a few years until you kind of get all the way through puberty. It doesn't automatically mean there's something wrong with her, but they immediately want to put them on birth control for literally everything. Oh, you have period pain? Birth control pills. Oh,
Yeah.
it's not regular? Let's make you regular. Now, she's 14. She's not trying to get pregnant. There's no like uh you know what I mean? There's nothing distressing or problematic. It's just not regular, but it's like they immediately want to put them on pills. All three so far.
Yeah.
All
I
three
wasn't
so far.
even sexually active at that time. I was a single young church girl, and they're giving me all kinds of hormonal birth control pills. Um,
Yeah, they did the same thing with me at different intervals. And the only thing that kind of saved me in a weird way is that birth control pills gave me horrific migraines and I could just never tolerate them. But they tried to give me a hormonal IUD and that went horribly wrong. I would have like fainting spells and I was calling them, telling them, I'm fainting like all the time ever since you put this in. And they told me it was psychosomatic. I was just being a nervous Nelly. I was just being silly. I was freaking myself out. And I was like, no, I'm just like going about my day pumping gas. And the next thing I know, I'm on the ground and someone has called the ambulance because I passed out while I was pumping gas.
that's why you
And
don't pump your own gas, Rachel.
that's right. That's right. Oh my
See,
goodness. Maybe we'll talk about that. But
I owned you. No.
you got me, Jamie. Oh no. But yeah, it was like they finally I got it. It took like me demanding that they do an ultrasound and find out what's going on in there. And they're like, oh, it's in the completely wrong place. It had like buried itself in the wrong place and
Yeah.
was pressing on a nerve that was making me faint. And they finally went in and took it out. But this is the kind of stuff that so many women deal with. And birth control pills are passed out like they're a vitamin. They
Hmm.
are treated like they're a vitamin and like everyone can be on them, anyone can be on them. And as long as you're not at risk for blood clots, then just take all the pills, right? And that's not true. There are major risks, there are major downsides, and they're rarely discussed. Patients are rarely informed. And we start girls on this so young. And even just with the pill, there can be after effects that last years. And women are almost never told that. They make it sound like you just go off of it and you'll just get your period back and be fine. I've
Hmm.
talked to dozens of women over the course of my life who took birth control, even not for that long, maybe a year or two, and then they go off it because they decide they want to have a baby and they have trouble conceiving for like years
Yeah.
after.
Yeah. I hadn't taken a pill in 20 years and I still have problems.
Yeah.
So it's crazy.
Yeah, I've
But
seen that with people who get the shot too. Like
mhm.
one of my daughter's friends, she got the depot shot when she was 16 and it took her like 4 years to get a period.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
My
long. And they told her like, oh, that can happen, but it's like point zero whatever amount of people, you'll be fine. But she was like a really tiny girl too. And I was just like, and there's other all kinds of other health concerns that they don't talk about, things like osteoporosis and nutrient deficiencies or iron toxicity. There's a lot of like health reasons that contraindicate birth control. And yet, like when I was a teenager in my state, I could just go down to the Ottawa County Health Department and get free birth control in a brown paper bag.
mm, hmm.
They would give you a brown paper bag with just like 200 condoms and 3 months worth of birth control. And
Hmm.
all you had to do was get your iron tested. They would just poke your finger, and as long as you weren't anemic, they would give it to you.
Hmm.
That seems insane. No parental, permission or notification. Just we're just going to give this to 16-year-olds.
Well, I mentioned this when I read that John Coleman book and in that Rockfin show that I did. The What you're talking about, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and these institutions that where our medical industry comes from, our textbooks come from, our medical schools come from, one of their prime directives is to go against the first commandment, which was be fruitful and multiply.
Yes.
And that's the origin of eugenics, is to go against the first thing that God told people to do in the Bible.
Yes.
So there's a couple more of these ads I just want to get through real fast, but
Sure.
keep the reducer happy. I don't know what that means, but this is what was chunky back in the day. And so if you are a terrible fat lady like this woman right here, then you can get methedrin for
Which I'm
obesity.
sure is just basically meth
Yeah,
or
just
alcohol
meth.
or something.
And then here's one for Ritalin that is kind of terrifying
That's
looking.
scary.
Yeah. Um, Here's another one for Ritalin. Helps relieve chronic fatigue and apathy quickly. And she's like crouching down with her vacuum. Do you see that?
That's so
So
crazy.
if you're tired of chores, then just take all of these drugs.
Yeah, what's the deal with the house chores? Like at
Yeah.
this point in time, women had like mechanized everything for house chores. I can't imagine it with it's I really feel like they were putting this marketing and propaganda because this is definitely like the Edward Bernays era too of this aggressive marketing. It's the same marketing type of campaign that got women smoking because women socially like weren't big smokers until Bernays and the cigarette companies made it like fashionable and cool and sexy for women to smoke. And I feel like it's similar to that where they're like, oh my gosh, aren't house chores terrible? Don't you hate them? Aren't they making you miserable and depressed? Aren't you sad? Don't you feel like and like when I interviewed my 97-year-old grandma, I asked her if she and her friends felt like this when they were young in the 30s and 40s. And she said, no, we never did. We never felt oppressed or like second class citizens or anything. And she was like, well, yeah, we had house chores, but she's like, my sister and I always thought that we got the better end of the deal because our brothers were the ones that had to do like the really heavy duty farm chores and stuff like that. So they were like
Mm-hmm.
pretty happy to just, it always makes it sound like women were the only people who had to do any menial tasks. It's like, you don't think men had to do chores or menial tasks around the yard or if they lived on farms and worked on farms? So I feel like there was this campaign to like
No, every
convince
man was
women they were
Don
unhappy,
Draper at the ad agency, just like kicking back scotch and smoking.
pinching women's butts and
Yeah.
having a scotch. Yeah. While the woman's at home just like, oh,
Yep.
oh, I can't do all these chores anymore. I'm so depressed. But yeah, you didn't see that until these giant propaganda campaigns came out, and it was in an effort to like convince you there's a problem, right? Problem, reaction, solution.
Mm-hmm.
That's at the heart of all the marketing and propaganda stuff. Convince people there's a problem, get a reaction, and then provide a solution. So yeah, if they can convince you that like you're a little chunky, just do a little meth about it.
Yeah.
Fine. It's just
So
like,
crazy.
yeah,
So, I want to play this, not just like show you, because I'm going to ask you about the origin of birth control in just a second. But this
sure.
is a Disney um, educational video from 1968 called Family Planning. And I'm going to show you whose families they're trying to reduce.
Oh boy.
Okay. What kind of people are we trying to keep out from being born? Here's
Uh-huh. Okay.
so you don't,
Where's he flying to, I
I
wonder?
don't
Where's
know,
he
but
going?
so it is really racist in a way because
Yeah.
it is talking about minorities reproducing here, there. So you don't want all of those Hispanic kids, right? You just want a couple because too many, you don't have enough to feed all of them.
Right. Yes. And we will talk about where this idea comes from.
But isn't this, I mean, this is Disney eugenics right here
Totally.
and racism.
When, like, what
Blatantly.
era is this from?
1968.
Okay.
So poor Julio. He needs to have less kids. because
Yeah.
Maria doesn't want to do all the chores, right?
Oh, she's so sad. Oh,
Yeah,
too many
no,
children.
yes,
Now the children are sad because life is terrible when you have a big family.
yep.
It's so bad.
So if you guys want to look that up, that's called Family Planning 1968 by Walt Disney. So Rachel, tell us about the lovely people who have brought this miracle to the 20th century.
Yes, let's. So, I mean, we should probably start with Thomas Malthus, and his idea that uh, population growth is going to outpace production of food at some point in the future.
Yeah,
And
just like that cartoon.
exactly, that is where that comes from. And to this day, people believe this, even though it's been debunked. And I do mention it in my book because um, we start with Malthus in like the 1700s and this idea of there's going to be too many people, there won't be enough resources, the resources are finite, and there's going to be too many people. And so then we're going to be facing massive population die-offs. Very similar again to this problem, reaction, solution. There was no problem necessarily, there was hunger problems, but usually it was actually because of distribution and like logistics of getting food to where it needed to go and things like that. um that's not like the important part though, but he's a British elitist, came up with this idea of in the future there's going to be too many people and we have to prevent it. This is where you get all the climate activism, you get the vegan stuff, the eat the bugs, all comes from this fear mongering that is over 300 years old. And it's been re-energized at different periods throughout time. So like the Victorian era and certainly around World War I is one of those times where you had a lot of, again, people from like the Royal Society, the British elite circles, the Fabian Society, and something called the Malthusian League, which is kind of Malthus's like legacy. This is a circle of elites in Britain who believe in the Malthusian view of the world, that it's this view of people as like bugs or like parasites on the
Yeah,
planet, right? You
useless
have the
eaters.
yeah, you have the beautiful innocent planet, this beautiful ball of green and blue and the beautiful flowers and the nature and the birds. And of course, Darwin comes along with the theory of evolution and the origin of species, and all of England becomes really convinced of this, and certainly in all the academic circles. Darwinian evolution becomes the primary theory. It becomes what all the universities teach. So medical industry, the biologists, the botanists, uh, anybody studying social and psychological sciences is thinking and viewing everything through a Darwinian paradigm and through a Malthusian lens, where we think of people as eaters, right? Mm-hmm. As consumers. And we think of resources and we're like concerned about not enough resources. So out of that, out of the Darwinian circles, you also get this idea of heredity. They didn't really know genetics per se yet because they hadn't found DNA and things like that, but they knew that things were heritable, and they could see like what we would now call epigenetic pressures on the population, where you might have people get taller or shorter based on environmental pressures or reproductive pressures, things like that. And with this came theories of eugenics. So this idea that certain segments of the population are more fit than others, more fit for survival than others. And of course, the idea that it's the responsibility of scientists to steer evolution, that they should take the reins and control it and steer it and perhaps even speed things up. So this is when you start getting like the Malthusian League, and you start to get other like little societies and academic circles that want to do this through various different means. And one of these people, well, there's several people that we'll go over, but everyone is usually pretty familiar with Margaret Sanger, and everyone's pretty familiar with how she felt about non-white people. Mm-hmm. And that she wanted to reduce populations that were not basically upper class white populations. And she She was sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation. She didn't just rise to prominence because she was some kind of scientist or researcher or doctor or anyone with any experience. She was a midwife for a short period of time, not very long at all. And she just happened to be in these socialist clubs, in these socialist academic circles, and sleeping with a lot of the men in them, like Havelock Ellis. H.G. Wells was a lover of hers for
I didn't
most.
know that.
Yes.
Ew.
Yes. Very ew. Very ew. I agree. And so through these circles of these socialists that she's sleeping with, because she joined like a socialist club in New York. And through that, she's meeting these people and kind of sleeping her way to the top of these circles, even though she's married.
Yeah.
Didn't care about that. She cheated on her husband quite a lot. She met John D. Rockefeller, who had just opened the Clinical Research Bureau and the Bureau of Hygiene. So hygiene is a code word for eugenics. At this time, they're using the word
racial hygiene.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And they would talk, it wasn't even just racial hygiene. It was like, oh, we can eliminate disease. Now that we know that certain characteristics or diseases or problems, some of the things they considered problems, I would take issue with whether they're even problems at all. But they would say basically any undesirable traits we think we can eliminate through selective breeding. And of course, who should be in charge of selective breeding? The elites, the academic elites should be, and the royals and things like that. The know-betters, the people who know better need
Top men, Rachel.
What's that?
Top men are working on the problems to
That's
solve,
right.
right?
The experts.
They have our best interests at heart, and experts are figuring it out for us.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. So Sanger meets John D. Rockefeller. She's super interested in various forms of family planning at the time. So prior to the development of the pill, they had things like the diaphragm and the cervical cap and the sponge and some lower tech forms of birth control. And abobos were definitely a subject that they were considering and talking about. And of course, at this time, it was very taboo. It wasn't approved of. Society in the West was still predominantly very Christian. And you had the Victorian milieu of kind of stuffy people who didn't talk about sexuality anyway, because it was gross and inappropriate. And like I feel like these days we could do with just a little bit of that, maybe just a little more, keep the private things private, but that's just me.
I have conversations with people every day and we don't talk about putting things in our butt. And
exactly.
I mean, I've met thousands and thousands of people and we had a grand time, and like SCX was never mentioned one time.
Yeah, it didn't, but I mean, shows like Sex in the City tried to make it seem like, oh, you're like a weird, backward, regressive person if you're not having regular conversations about orgasms with your girlfriends over brunch.
Right.
And you could say that maybe in the Victorian period, it was the other extreme, and that may be true, but now we're getting into the roaring 20s. This is 1923 when Sanger opens her Clinical Research Bureau with funding from John D. Rockefeller. And he and his family give her major financial support for her clinics and her personally. And she eventually turns these into Planned Parenthood International. So Rockefeller already had opened the Bureau of Social Hygiene in 1913. It's just another eugenics organization that was kind of advocating for sterilizing people who were deemed to be unfit and trying to make that like a socially acceptable idea. And again, it's always under this idea of we're just helping. It's for the general public. It's for public health. By the way, the Rockefeller Foundation are basically the ones who coined public health as a thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're no longer concerned about the individual and their health. We're concerned about the public health. And that's why it's always tied in with socialist circles and the Fabian Society. So they want somebody that they can kind of promote and put out there, because John D. Rockefeller is not going to put himself out there and start advocating this stuff. But Sanger's willing to do it. She's connected with the right people already. So they send her out, and this becomes kind of her thing. She goes around the world stumping for these things, and she's kind of like an agent for them to get this stuff going. So
Hmm.
she's kind of taking the personal heat. She's getting paid to take the personal heat. And this is how they got this stuff going. So she starts some publications like the Birth Control Review, which she started in 1917, and that publication regularly featured the work of German researcher Ernst Rudin, who studied psychiatric and mental disorders with Emil Kraepelin, who's the father of medical psychiatry. He was the first person to medicalize mental health. It used to be something that was thought of as like, okay, if you have a mental health problem, it might be spiritual, it might be social, it might be familial. You would talk to your priest, you would consult with family, things like that to try to figure out what's going on with somebody. And then people who had severe problems like severe alcoholism or schizophrenia, maybe they would end up institutionalized. But these were the first people to medicalize this industry. And along with that, because they were making the argument that so tuberculosis was a huge thing. A lot of people with tuberculosis ended up in mental institutions, weirdly. And those had a lot of overlap. People who had schizophrenia or tuberculosis, and they're putting them in different institutions, right? And so they started to make this argument that, well, these are going to get too full, and we're going to have a public health crisis on our hands if we don't reduce the number of people who are like mentally unfit. And so the Rockefeller Foundation does an annual study that they put in their annual report where they try to quantify the costs of mentally unwell and physically unfit people on society. So they start to make this argument that if you have mental health issues, emotional maladjustments, if you're an illegitimate child, if you're a fatherless bastard, all these different things, the unfit, and they had, I mean, we're talking about an era where there was no politically correctness or anything. So they would call them like idiots or invalids or things like that. And it did include like racial groups that they didn't like who were considered like a scourge on society, like gypsies, Jews, Black people, indigenous people. And they would make this economic argument like, oh, it costs society this many millions of dollars every year to have these people around. And so all of the productivity of society is being sucked away by the unfit.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could just, we're not talking about, they would say, we're not talking about killing anyone. We're just talking about preventing them from reproducing, which
Mm-hmm.
is going to be good for everyone. It's going to make a better future with less problems. And, so this appeals to politicians and other people who want to say, oh, I'm going to boost the economy and boost productivity by being selective about who's allowed to reproduce. And they said one of the best ways to do this is we'll just make it voluntary. We'll open clinics and we'll convince poor people that you don't have enough money to raise children. You won't be able to feed them. And so if
That
you
sounds
come here,
familiar.
yeah,
Right.
if you come here, we'll help you. So the Birth Control Review, it's featuring all this. And by the way, when I mentioned Ernst Rudin and Emil Kraepelin, they were both Yahtzees.
Mm-hmm.
So they were in Mean Mr. Mustache's group, right?
Uh-huh.
And they're running his eugenics programs. So all this work is being done at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, another Rockefeller funded institution,
Mm-hmm.
completely started with Rockefeller money. And at the same time, people connected in these circles are pushing alternative lifestyles in the 20s and 30s in Germany. So they're pushing, a lot of people don't know that the gender stuff we're dealing with right now started then. And people who were susceptible to those ideas are being encouraged to become transformers.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to be careful of YouTube, guys. So sorry
Mm-hmm.
for the code words, but they're being encouraged to become transformers. And then people who have gay lifestyles. There was a big underground gay scene in Berlin at the time, and they're encouraging that.
It's Babylon Berlin.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And people really don't know that the stuff we're dealing with that right now, the rainbow Skittles stuff, That was huge in the 20s and 30s in Europe and in some places in the United States as well. Like Chicago had a big underground scene for this, New York, LA. And World War II kind of put a halt on it because there were more pressing issues. There's like, economic problems. And when the war comes, it's kind of like, okay, maybe we'll put that on the back burner for now because we need soldiers and we lost a bunch of people in World War II. So we had a baby boom. So they kind of laid off of it for a while and now it's back because now it's back to that business, right? So they just put it on pause. But the Rockefeller family was responsible for the funding that supported all of this work because these people were racial hygiene advocates. And at that time, the Rockefellers were super down with that. They thought it was great. They formed an expert committee on questions of population and racial policy, and they're doing the preliminary work to try to create birth control because they had already started synthesizing hormones. But like I said, World War II put a damper on that. And so after the war in 1951 is when Sanger meets with Gregory Pincus, who is working on the birth control pill. And then really weirdly, Leon Trotsky, the Bolshevik leader's grandson, is in Mexico because Trotsky had fled to Mexico to try to avoid being assassinated. Didn't work out for him. But his grandson was there, and somehow he gets appointed to one of the manufacturers who finally did end up making birth control. I always get the two mixed up because there was Sandoz is the one that was making LSD, and then it was the other one that was making the birth control pill, Syntex. So oddly, Esteban Volkov, who is, and he wasn't just Trotsky's grandson, he preserved Trotsky's house as a museum. He was an ardent socialist, eugenicist, all that stuff. He and a few other chemists in Mexico working for Syntex Corporation became the first ones to actually synthesize the birth control pill with help from Pincus and some of the German researchers from Operation Paperclip. All these kind of people figured out that they could go to Mexico and there's less red tape, less cost to doing this. So that's why it was made there. And after that, it just becomes ubiquitous because they've already got clinics established all throughout Europe, all throughout America, and they're putting them in developing nations as well. This is a huge focus. So there's another woman that most people probably haven't heard of. Her name was Marie Stopes. She was like the British Sanger, but worse, probably. She was an even more upfront eugenicist, and she would talk about all the eugenics societies had language they would use to describe tiers of society. So it's a very classist kind of thing. Really weird for people who are into socialism. Fabian society and Marxist socialists are talking about A tier classes and B tier classes and C tier classes of society. And she would lament that the smart, educated, elite A-tier people were having less and less children, and that these lower rungs, the poors, we don't want the poors, that they were overpopulating in her opinion. And she made all kinds of horrific comments about non-white people, indigenous people, and wanted their populations like drastically reduced. So she starts it was really funny because she was married. Her first husband that she married, she divorced him. She never took his name, and then she divorced him really soon after the wedding. And she went to the court and lied and said that he was impotent and couldn't consummate, but because he was stuck in Canada and couldn't get back to be in court to defend himself. And so they granted her the divorce. But her second husband she met through the Malthusian League. She had a connection there who introduced her to Mr. Humphrey Verdon Rowe, and he was a wealthy eugenicist, British elite fellow, member of the Royal Society and member of the Malthusian League, who funds all of her efforts and helps her open the first birth control clinic in Britain. And so they're targeting like poor neighborhoods, and she would have her people that worked for her go out to the poor neighborhoods and try to convince the poor women that they needed to come to this clinic and learn about reproduction and how to prevent babies and things like that. But it turns out that poor people in the UK had already like developed a lot of mistrust of the elites there over many centuries for lots of good reasons,
Yeah.
If you've ever seen Braveheart, you might know about that.
We're about to do a Mel Gibson stream. on
Yeah.
fire.
Yeah. So they didn't trust her. They didn't trust these people, and it didn't work. So you're going to love this, what she decided to do, because she's like, I'm doing all this outreach to poor people, and they just don't trust me to sterilize them for some reason. So in 1922, she heard that the Anglican Church was going to have a convention, like a meeting of bishops.
Uh-huh.
And she got a really good idea. And she wrote a book, a little, like a booklet, like a little pamphlet called A New Gospel to All Peoples. And she claimed that she was just out in nature, enjoying her property out in the woods one day, thinking about life, and that a voice came to her suddenly and dictated to her these words. Now, you might know, if you've ever read my book, that automatic writing and mediumship was a very popular way around this time for women to get ideas out there without having to face massive backlash and criticism if they were positing crazy ideas like we should sterilize all the poor women.
Mm-hmm.
So she didn't have enough influence, and she felt like these are all like Anglicans and Catholics and like devout Protestants who don't want to be sterilized because, like you said, they're like, what about be fruitful and multiply?
Mm-hmm.
What about that? I don't want to get sterilized. So she thought what she would do is go through clergy and get the church to back her up. And the way she tried to do that was to say that, like, an angel or a spirit came to her and told her to write this pamphlet about the population and how we need to reduce it.
This is
It
so
didn't
crazy.
Isn't it crazy? So she sent this. So she copies this, makes copies, and sends it to all the Anglican bishops and to people in the Catholic Church to try to get them on board. Now, luckily, they told her where to stick it. They thought it was horrible. It didn't go over well at all, but it was just the idea that she tried to use the church to influence her eugenicist plans here that I thought was super interesting, and said it was like automatic writing, like, oh, I didn't write this. It came to me from a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it did, but probably not an angel of the Lord or anything like that. It could have been a spirit, but probably not a nice one.
Every time you get to the bottom of these things, it's always some Fruit Loop and a demon.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
That's what this is. So she started calling herself a prophet. And in this pamphlet, she also advocated for a world religion. She said all of the Buddhists and the Hindus and the Protestants and the Catholics and the Jews, we all need to come together and form a one world religion. That's always another thing that these entities seem to tell people.
Yeah.
When they claim that it's an entity coming and telling them to deliver a message, it's always form a one world religion.
Yeah.
And
All is
sterilize all
one.
the pores.
Yes. God is in you, all is one.
Yeah, that's what she said. That's exactly what it was. It was that same nonsense that we find all the time. Well, it didn't work. Didn't work. But luckily, she had this wealthy husband, and she wrote a couple of books that were pretty popular. She wrote a book about sex and like instructing women on how to have orgasms. So that's nice. And it did sell pretty well. So they did have some money, and they created one of the early NGOs called the Marie Stopes International. And this was the entity they used to open clinics in places like India, Papua New Guinea, Africa, where these unwanted people are, right? Just like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we have to go there and help them by giving them birth control and abobos. That's how we're going to help.
Mm-hmm.
So this
Don't forget your scabby too on the way out.
exactly, because public health, right?
Yeah.
So in 1976, after she had passed, this foundation was kind of falling apart and not getting funding anymore. It had kind of gone by the wayside a bit and wasn't as influential as it had been. But lucky for us, it was refounded and revitalized by a man named Tim Black, who was part of the Population Council. And he had a Ford Fellowship that sent him around the world in 1969 to study how we can reduce population in these indigenous nations. So he comes along in 1976 with his partner, whose name was, where is it? Phil Harvey, his partner. They revitalize this, they get new funding, and they open more clinics around the world, and they begin to also offer abobos, like promoting it.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find in the research the exact year, because when it started in 1920s, they weren't offering those yet, but at some point, probably after it became legal, I would guess, they did quietly start doing them. But in the 1970s, when these two men took over, is when they really heavily promoted it. Now, this is the part that where it gets extra weird, if it hasn't been weird enough for y'all. When Tim Black took this over, he was appointed like a, not the night ship, but the one that's below it. It's called a CBE, but it's like a honor you receive from the British Crown for his services to international family planning in developing countries. I love when they award these people for exterminating indigenous populations around the world.
They're all about helping developing countries.
Yeah, they're just helping. And MSI, they renamed it. So they renamed the foundation the MSI because Marie Stopes has now been so connected to eugenics, which isn't cool anymore. It's not politically correct anymore. They renamed it. And this is another thing they always do. Whenever they tell you, oh, we used to do bad things, but we don't do bad things anymore. All that means is we gave it a new name and we rerouted the funding, and we're still up to our shenanigans generally.
Yeah.
So now MSI works with the Gates Foundation, the World Bank, and the World Health Organization, among others. There's multiple other NGOs they work with.
Of course.
There was a big kerfuffle that happened in 2019. You can still find the news articles all over for this, because the British press found out that MSI received 7.5 million pounds from Phil Harvey, one of the partners, from his charitable foundation. And they figured out that this guy owns the Adam and Eve porn company, the porn and sex toy company.
Oh, yeah. The store,
so they were like,
you see those billboards in Florida, like Florida is such a crazy place because every billboard is for like a sex thing and the next one is a Jesus.
Yes. So that's kind of what they're doing with this. Is it's like, we're helping women, we're helping girls. It's always women and girls, women and girls, women and girls.
Yeah.
We're helping them have autonomy. We're helping them take back their bodies. We're giving them financial freedom by helping them control their future. But also, we're one of the leading distributors of pornography and sex toys in the sex industry. And in 2019, MSI provided 5 million abortions. So, I mean, abobos. Sorry, maybe we can edit that out. This is about like their annual norm is about 5 million a year. So there were all kinds of organizations outraged that you're saying you're trying to help women, but you're also exploiting women through pornography. So that's what this organization is about. And when we look at Sanger, it's kind of similar, because like the Wilhelm Foundation, the Kaiser Wilhelm Foundation was the main vehicle for eugenics in Germany in the 30s and 40s. And now we have other NGOs that basically do the same work. And it's always, yes, you need the stabbies, you need the pills, you need the abobos, because otherwise you're just going to be poor and you're going to be a loser.
Yeah. Too many mouths to feed. And you mentioned Trotsky's relative was involved in this. And that was one of the things in Karl Marx's writing, is he thought of people as empty bellies.
Yes.
Like locusts or something. And if you can eradicate them, then you'll have more resources.
Yes. And of course, who wants the resources? It's the elite. They want it all for themselves. And another aspect to this, so Trotsky's grandson, who has one of the patents from Syntex for this birth control pill, his daughters have major high-level posts at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health here in the United States. One of them is here running things. The other one is in Mexico with the same type of post at the Mexican version of the NIH. I'm just like, it's really interesting that Trotsky, who had intelligence ties and, is in all these Fabian circles and funded by the Wall Street elite who helped him try to hide in Mexico, his grandson and then his grandson's daughters are all in these high-level government positions. And one of them works in like birth control and reproductive health, and the other one works in she's got a lot of military connections as well through the NIH, working on military stuff. And she works on addiction. And she's been helping to develop a stabby to treat addiction. And the idea is we'll just give it to everyone. even if you're not like necessarily predisposed to addiction problems, we'll just give this as a stabby to prevent. We, the chemical manufacturers who made the pharmaceuticals, you just showed all those ads,
Mm-hmm.
get on this psych drug, get on this downer, get on this barbiturate. And now they're like, oh no, we have a pill addiction problem. We're the ones that made all the OxyContin and all of the barbiturates and downers and things that Xanax and all the stuff that kids are using for party drugs and people are getting addicted to. But don't worry, because we, who caused the problem, are developing a stabby to solve the problem.
Well,
So that's
who
really
else is qualified, right? To cure your
I,
addiction.
I just think it's crazy how that worked out. So all of these ideas come from people who want less of us. They want less people.
Right, right.
So I talk about the book The Population Bomb in here, which was another like Malthusian revival that's been totally debunked. In fact, now now we're looking at a population collapse.
Yes, exactly.
And
There's
that's part
a
of the reason.
crisis in
Yeah.
Japan, in UK, in America, in Canada.
Yeah. And so now what they're doing is saying, oh no, people are having enough babies, but that's not the problem. The problem is there's too many old people and the young people. We have to have the young people at work because we have supply chain problems because there's not enough workers and producers, and we have a labor shortage because there's not enough people. But really, we wouldn't need those things so much if there weren't all these old people who are unproductive. So now you see in Canada and Japan euthanasia programs for the elderly,
Mm-hmm.
for people. I've seen people with just like chronic ailments, like chronic pain syndrome, addiction problems, any type of chronic condition, they're being offered euthanasia as a treatment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. There's
again,
too many
all of these
boomers now.
ideas come from people who don't want you to exist.
Right.
So I think that should be a major factor when we're telling all these young girls to get on these, whether it's the pills, the IUDs, the stabbies, any of that stuff. It's all coming from people who don't want you to be here.
Right. And then I just saw this little factoid. It says hormonal birth control is a registered carcinogen by the World Health Organization. So even they are admitting, since 2007, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is part of the WHO, classified the most commonly used birth control in the US as a group 1 carcinogen. And it totally is linked to breast and cervical cancer increase.
And it's funny because you might have mentioned that I said the World Health Organization is one of the major backers of this MSI NGO that goes around giving people these exact hormones that they're saying are carcinogens.
Yeah.
Under the guise of helping these populations be more prosperous. And there's one more thing too that I think everybody should know. I mentioned this lady, Marie Stopes, lying to get her first divorce, and she got a reputation for doing this a lot, like fudging things and making up stuff. Sanger also got caught all the time, either plagiarizing or misrepresenting facts or just straight up making things up. And in my book, I detail how doctors from PP, the Planned Parenthood place, they've come out all the time, and they're usually silenced pretty fast by like mainstream media and things like that. But they come out and said, yeah, a lot of our statistics are totally baloney. We made them up because it was an idea that like if we have to lie a little bit for the greater good, it's fine. This is another thing that the other eugenicists in Germany were saying. They and people, there's a quote from an MK Ultra doctor who said he called it doing good by stealth, which means if I have to lie or do things secretly because I know they're unethical or things like that, I'll do it. And in the 1938 Rockefeller Foundation annual report, they noted that we'd really like to do more hygiene. We'd like to do more eugenics, but unfortunately, there's still a lot of social taboos. So if we're going to do that, we're going to have marketing and propaganda to make these things acceptable. And a lot of the elites now in our current day have mentioned things like this, and they say things like we have to make the unthinkable thinkable again. So like you see the same when you read all this stuff a lot and you're looking at these things a lot, you notice these patterns just repeating. It's the
Mhm.
same crap in the 1920s as it is in the 2020s. They're
Yes.
using similar marketing, similar propaganda. It's the same way of like selecting spokespeople and putting them out in the public to create like a public relations campaign to make these things sound good and benign and benevolent, when they're at the very best I could say is they're being disingenuous and they're not telling people about the risks. If I wanted to be more honest and say what I really think, I think that it's basically a ploy to do eugenics under the guise of helping people.
Mm. One of my favorite pictures or phenomena is when I see people posting babies born with the IUD in their hand. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah,
Like it, life finds a way,
it sure does.
right?
Yeah, it does.
And
And I mean,
these books that they sent us are about, does the pill prevent the pregnancy or does it terminate it? And the answer is both, and you don't know what's
which,
happening.
yes,
So you could be pregnant and the pill could make it so that it does not attach. So a fertilized egg could be there, but the pill makes it so that it doesn't attach. So it does
right.
kill the fetus.
Yes.
Um, and
And
I,
don't you think that so there were people early on who pointed this out because that's just like biological facts. And I think that is why they created all these different narratives that I hear in different debates and things like that, where people will say things like an embryo isn't a person, you don't get personhood until later. So and the whole it's a clump of cells, it's not a person yet. It's
mhm,
an embryo, and it's why they will correct your language. They'll be like, that's not a baby, it's an embryo. Or they'll say, oh, well, if you think that that's a baby, then I guess every time a man masturbates, he's throwing away a bunch of babies. Like, I think they come up with a lot of narrative tricks to make women, and I've heard women say this, women who have gone through with the bobos and had regrets later will say, they presented all of this information to me in a way that made me think I wasn't killing anything. I was just disposing of some cells.
yeah,
I didn't think it was like they will misrepresent and use language to make it sound like, oh, this isn't a person yet. So it's not, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing immoral about it. It's not a real person. It's just
yeah,
what it's like a chicken's egg or something like that. But like you said, you have no way to know if the ovum has been fertilized before it gets shed
yeah,
because it wasn't able to implant.
exactly. And you guys should go look up the videos of like where they have recorded the moment of conception,
Mm-hmm.
where the sperm gets in the egg and there's a flash of light.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. And so there's some kind of zinc sparks that happen. So, I mean, to us, this would be like, the spirit of God breathing life into a
Right.
person at the
Yes.
moment of conception. So if you are on birth control and are sexually active and you do have a fertilized egg and this interferes with that, then you are kind of culpable for terminating that.
Yeah. And I
Birth.
mean, if you're watching this and that was you and you were under these false assumptions because these facts were misrepresented to you, because like Jamie said, we've been very trained to trust the experts. And if a person's wearing a lab coat and has a plaque on the wall that says they've got a medical degree, and we're told this all the time, it's like, well, what do you know? You don't have a degree in this. You haven't studied it.
Yeah.
So we really depend on these people, especially if you're a young woman who's impressionable. Please know that this is something you can be forgiven for and you can be redeemed from. We are not condemning you or anything like that. And I think there does need to be a lot more grace given to women who get sucked into this kind of thing because they do present it to them in a way that makes it really feel like this is just an answer to your problems and your concerns and your worries, and there's nothing wrong with it. And women trust that and go through with this. And then later they may find this information and really struggle with it. So I just wanted to say that.
The doctor that had me on all the hormones would give me free samples of Vioxx. Did you ever hear about that drug?
No.
So it was like a muscle relaxer. And
Oh,
he would just hand them out like jelly beans, like, oh, you have cramps, take this Vioxx. And something in me, because I hate pills,
I
right?
do
I don't
too.
want to feel weird. I don't want to take pain pills. I want to feel good naturally. And except for chalk. Chalk is great. But and we're going to talk about that in a second. But
Yeah.
so I would just stow the boxes of Vioxx under my bathroom cabinet. I mean, I had a bag of them, like at least 100 pills, right, that I never
Whoa.
took. And lo and behold, like a couple years later, I'm watching TV and it's like, do you have like, are you almost dead? You can join our class action lawsuit from Vioxx. And I'm like, oh, that's the pills that he gave me a bunch of I never took just because like I had this bad feeling about it. And so you have to watch what they're giving you because you never know what's going to end up like being part of a class action lawsuit later. Like my grandma took this thing called fen-phen.
Yeah. Yep. I remember that. It
Edrin, I can't remember what it's actually called, but
was like
and
diet stuff, right?
yeah, like
Yeah.
weight loss pills, like that one I showed you, like that goofy one.
Yeah.
And like her heart was in heart failure, and so she had heart attacks and heart problems and stuff from this fen-phen. She got money from that class action lawsuit.
Yeah, and another thing we should mention is that a lot of people don't know that medical school curriculum is provided to medical schools by the pharmaceutical companies themselves.
Yeah.
They are the ones that write the materials and give the materials to medical students. Again, this is healthcare is no longer holistic. It's no longer about the person. It's no longer about finding the cause of what might be wrong with someone's health. It is basically you go to the doctor, they put your symptoms in the computer tells them what to prescribe, and they prescribe you something.
Mm-hmm.
And if that fails, they go down the list and give you the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. I've been through this myself.
Yeah.
And this is certainly the case with birth control because they do get kickbacks.
Yes.
So pharmaceutical sales reps will go to doctors' offices and say, if you prescribe a certain amount, we'll give you this much percentage or this much money for every prescription you write. So it provides an incentive that seems like it would be a conflict of interest and shouldn't be there, but for whatever reason, it's allowed. So they do have reasons to do this. Number one, they're trained that this is how you treat disease.
Mm-hmm.
With prescriptions with pharmaceuticals. It doesn't really like because I've had things wrong with me where I'm like, well, but what's causing it? And they're like, doesn't matter, the treatment's the same.
Yeah, I asked this time, I was like, do you know how long it takes a cyst to form and like what I can do differently because I don't want to keep getting these? And they're like, nobody knows. And I'm like, I'm sure that's not true. And yeah, they just don't have any answers. Not that I'm not grateful to surgeons and
Yes.
experts. Like we need that stuff, but we shouldn't need it that much, right?
Yeah, and it
I have
should
utmost respect for like emergency room doctors.
yes,
And,
yes.
you know,
If you get a
triage.
gunshot wound or you're in a
Yeah.
car accident, you want those surgeons and those emergency room people. And there's plenty of good general practitioners and gynecologists out there. It's just that if you understand the origin of the medicalization of health and the medical industry, and you understand how insurance works and how pharmaceutical companies incentivize things and how doctors are trained, doctors get about 4 hours of nutrition education in their entire curriculum. The rest is all about how to prescribe drugs and stabbies and do surgical interventions, which we're not saying all those things are bad. We're not like teetotalers about
Yeah, we're
medicine.
not
We're
Jehovah's
like,
Witness or like Amish or
right, right. Where we're like, well, if the Lord takes my child, the Lord takes my no, it's like, yeah, you want life-saving medicine, of course. And there's lots of great things about modern medicine. It's just that from a holistic health perspective, when you're looking at a whole person, and women are a whole person, and our reproductive systems affect everything in our body. Everything.
you
You can't
overreact
just
to everything. You need
yeah,
to
you can't just shut down women's reproductive systems. Or what the birth control pill does too is it makes your body think you're already pregnant.
exactly.
And there are implications to that as well. We know now, we have a ton of studies that show that women's mate selection is completely different when they're on the pill versus when they're not on the pill. So that's one reason why you might see the feminization of men and some of that stuff taking hold, is because women, 88% of American women will be on the birth control pill at some point in their life.
Because they'll prescribe it for anything,
Yeah.
acne
Yep.
or,
Acne, cramps,
eczema. Yeah.
heavy periods. Sometimes, like, I get migraines. I've been struggling with them for a long time. And some people, they'll put on a permanent birth control because, like, mine are triggered by hormonal changes. I'll get
Mhm.
them during my period and when I'm ovulating.
Mhm.
And they're quite bad and they're resistant to medication for that reason. And so some people in my position, what they do is put them on all active pills, just like they did with you,
Mhm.
where they have you take the pill consistently and you just don't get periods anymore. And they're like, plus you won't get a period. Isn't that great? But now, after other things I've been through, I'm like, no way. And for me, they tend to trigger them to where I'm just getting them continuously. But a lot of people, they put them on birth control as a migraine headache treatment. And
I saw a commercial whenever I go to get an oil change. It's so weird because I'm exposed to television and commercials like daytime TV, and 80% of the commercials are for pharmaceuticals. And I noticed this one now is like one that can temporarily stop your period because it's pesky. Like if you want to go on
yeah,
vacation
yes, it's
or
your
if you're
honeymoon.
getting
You don't want to get a
married or like,
period.
yeah. So it's just this annoying thing that we can turn off and on at will because we have the science now.
Yes.
And I just think it's weird how a kickback of this is like in paganism, they celebrate the menstrual cycle. So
Yeah.
that's another extreme. So
Right.
they worship the menstrual blood,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it's their like, sacred moon time for their rituals and all of that. So it's just like a weird.
Yeah, and you'll see people doing witchcraft stuff with, and Gnostics, some of the really bizarre Gnostic cults that believe that the way that you, so instead of like theosis, the Gnostic version of gnosis is like you desecrate and do the most immoral things. You, like, through transgression is how you get, like, released from your earthly form, or like
Mhm.
freed from the archons or whatever wacky stuff they think. And they will have like a Eucharist where they put menstrual stuff on like a wafer and eat it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
called Cakes of Light.
No, thanks.
Yeah, no, I'm
I'm good.
kidding. So this kind of made me think of like Genesis, and I don't know, is the menstrual cycle part of the chastisement of childbirth? Because I think everybody kind of suffers with this. I don't
Yeah.
know anybody who doesn't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
But in, God's infinite mercy, he transforms that into a great source of joy through motherhood.
Yeah. And here's a fun fact too. Back in the day when women didn't have every form of birth control shoved in their face from the time they're 10 years old, you would have a baby. And because you didn't have to go right back to work 2 weeks after having the baby, you would nurse. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time when you're lactating, you're not ovulating. So you would get a break from your period the whole 9 months you're pregnant, and then maybe for another 2 years after while you're nursing a baby. And then when you wean that baby, your period comes back and you would get pregnant again. So women 200 years ago might only get 20 or 30 periods through their whole
Mm.
life.
Interesting.
Now, if you're on birth control where you're getting a period, or you're, using condoms or other forms where you're still getting a period, but you're preventing pregnancy, you're having 12 periods a year for what would it be, like 35, 40 years, depending on how early you get it and how late it stops. So let's just say 30 years times 12, that's 360 periods or something that you're
Mm-hmm.
getting, when maybe your great 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 grandmother only had 30 periods because she had 7 or 8 kids and she nursed all of them the whole way through until they were like 2 years old. So she didn't get that many. So you wouldn't have this pesky period every single month for decade after decade after decade if you were not preventing pregnancy, if you weren't like trying to prevent having a family so that you can do other things that you think are more important. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So that's something to think about too.
Well, one of the slurs that I hate when they talk about women and they call them a crazy bitch. I hate that. And I just think it's just the worst. But part of the psychology of people who are taking these birth controls is that it's messed up and it does make you crazy, right?
It made me feel insane. I remember the first time I went on the pill, aside from the headaches and breast tenderness and feeling tired and being really hungry, I remember sitting on my couch and there's like a Folgers commercial and the kid like comes home early for Christmas to surprise his parents and they're drinking the Folgers and I'm like bawling. I'm crying, sobbing, bawling at the Folgers commercial. I'm like, am I losing my mind?
Yeah.
And I didn't feel good on it. I didn't feel good on birth control at all.
I didn't
I
either.
felt very weird.
I felt disconnected from myself. Like I didn't have craziness. I had numbness.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be touched. I didn't feel lots of
That's
love.
another thing. Do you know that's another thing that happens when you, many women, when they go on birth control, it just absolutely annihilates their libido, which
Mhm,
really affects your relationship if you're in a marriage. If you're in a
mhm,
marriage, I was listening to this podcast with a woman talking about this, how she got engaged and like the whole courtship with her fiance, they're like madly in love and it's like so amazing. You know, that new love feeling where it's like the first year you're together and it's so great. And so because they were going to get married and be sleeping together, but she didn't think they were ready for kids yet for whatever reason, she started taking birth control like a couple months before the wedding.
mhm,
And she said she remembered like immediately feeling very disinterested in him. All of that magic just was gone. She
mm,
didn't have the same desire for him. She wasn't interested in planning the wedding anymore. And she thought there was something wrong with her. And she went to doctors. And she remembers sitting in her hotel on their honeymoon, bawling and crying because she just didn't want to have sex at all. It just,
mhm,
the idea was just awful. And like what you said, she's like, I just felt numb. I didn't, all the feelings I had, all that magic, it was just like gone. So she thought any number of other things could be wrong. She went to a therapist, she went to different doctors, they did blood tests, they did all this stuff. And she said for like 3.5 years this went on before, so she like randomly came across something she was reading that said birth control can really crush your libido as a woman. And she was like, oh my God, like that's what. So then they went off of it and things got much better, but it will kill your like desire for your mate and it destroys pair bonding too. I feel like, you know,
mm, mhm.
it does destroy that, like, because you don't have the normal like oxytocin and all of the bonding hormones flowing like you would if you weren't on that birth control.
Right. So there's a great book that I listened to an interview by the author. It's called Your Brain on Birth Control by Sarah Hill, about the effects of hormonal contraceptives on women's psychology. So not just your physiology, but your psychology. And she said the same thing. She said her behavior changed after she stopped using the pill. She said the world went from gray to colorful immediately. And that's kind of how I felt.
Yeah.
She says everyone's hormone levels are different, so the pill affects everyone different. So your body's like baseline could be completely different from mine, but they're giving the same dosage of pills and trying to make everybody the same,
Yeah. And
right?
that's what happened to me. In case you guys are wondering, you're like, Rach, how'd you get 5 kids if you were trying to do birth control when you were younger? Well, we found out later because I got pregnant on birth control twice, and I was like, I'm doing it exactly like uh, I'm a very punctual person as far as like I take it every single day at the same time. I'm not
Yeah.
doing any of the things you're not supposed to do. And I got pregnant twice, and they finally tested my hormones because I wanted to have a third baby. Because I was like, well, we're here, let's just go for it. And they were like, oh, your progesterone is like rock bottom low and you have like high estrogen. And it turns out that like the type of pill they had me on, my doctor at the time explained it to me. He's like, basically, you probably would have had more trouble getting pregnant off the pill than when we put you on it.
Hmm.
And he's like, he kind of said he felt like a big disservice was done to me because my prior doctor hadn't figured any of that out or checked into it or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt like it was kind of crummy, but yeah, we don't all start with the same hormone profile,
Mm-hmm.
but they put everybody on the same stuff.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that the sex hormones aren't just for reproduction. They have an effect on all of your bodily functions. So,
Yes.
like you said, we're a holistic being. You can't just carve us up into different chemicals and organs,
Yeah.
right?
Which is what our medical industry does right now. If you've ever noticed, if you go to your general practitioner and you got a foot problem, they send you to a foot specialist. If you've got a neurological problem, you go to a neurologist. Sometimes that's good, but like you said, these systems all work together and affect each other. So you can't always just, oh, your foot hurts, foot doctor. Oh, you have chest pain, cardiologist. And I've run into that too, where it's like I'll have a condition where it's like, oh, well, you need three specialists because the conditions overlap or something. So, yeah, they seem
Yeah.
to think of us like you can just take us in parts and fix the parts when all the parts work together.
And not just that, like it's getting a procedure is such a gauntlet because I just did this. So you have to go to your general practitioner and then they give you a referral to a specialist. And then you have to go like get your ultrasound and then you have to wait for that result. And like this whole thing, it took me probably 6 or 7 months
Mm-hmm.
just to get like a simple operation that I knew that what the problem was,
Yeah.
right? It's so crazy. But so these hormonal birth control, they cause anxiety and depression. So take more birth control, take more Xanax, take more Ritalin. 3 times higher in some cases. There is an increased risk in unaliving yourself, especially within the first 3 months of use.
And see, I've never been told that. Any of the times they started me on a different pill or something, nobody ever told me that.
Yeah.
And if they did, I probably would have seriously reconsidered.
And
That's
so
pretty
they're
scary.
going around blaming external factors for mood and not hormonal issues.
Yeah.
So getting your hormones balanced is like priority one for women. And guys have low testosterone, so they need those hormones balanced also. And that's where chalk comes in. I guess we could talk about that right now because
Yeah.
these couple things, and I'm gonna send you these things too. Um, I hate pills, but I will talk about chalk because it actually works. The ashwagandha is so good for mood, and the shilajit is like a great thing for everything. Irish moss, that's the minerals that you need to balance your hormones. Seven wonders. Every time I see people like talk about mushrooms and
Yeah.
their like uh advantages to taking mushrooms, this has 7 different type of mushrooms in it.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't tell you guys, I wouldn't talk about this stuff if I didn't take it myself and I haven't seen results, especially
Yeah.
with
And
shilajit and ashwagandha.
yeah, those are like holistic supplements because, like you said, there's certain mineral imbalances that drastically affect hormones. Magnesium is one of them, but there's
Mm-hmm.
multiple other ones like copper and zinc and all kinds of different things. And a lot of us don't get that because number one, everybody eats processed food. But
Mm-hmm.
even if you're trying to eat a whole food diet, most of the soil in America is really heavily depleted because of all of the monocrop farming for like factory farmed meats and things like that, and then soy production and the ethanol production. So now like vast swaths of American farmland, they call it the goiter belt because
Oh
there's they do. There's no iodine, there's no magnesium left in the soil. So, like,
no.
all the crops you would have eaten that would have given you, like, nourishment are depleted of all those things now. And
Yeah.
so, a lot of people really should be supplementing with something.
Yeah. So there is almost no research about the effects of birth control used during adolescence on adult women. So they haven't even kept up
That's
with what happens when you give a teenager birth control and like, what happens 20 years later.
so
That's
they
me.
just assume that it's fine.
Yeah.
That seems weird.
But now they're figuring out it can trigger autoimmune disease. And like you said, naturally cycling women perform more masculine looking men. So when it's proven like there's 4 stages of your hormonal cycle that takes 28 days. There's ovulation, follicular, menstruation, and I can't remember the other one.
I can never remember that one either, but it's
It,
the one like right after you're done with your
it's
period.
basically spring, summer, autumn, winter.
Yeah.
And you feel like doing different things different weeks of the month. I'm sure you can agree with that.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't really think women should be made to enter the workforce in a male dominated 9 to 5 cycle, because men cycle their hormones on a 24-hour
Yeah.
cycle. So they need sleep, they need sex, they need food, all at the same times of day.
Yeah.
Women
And
are
then they're
not like
good.
that.
Right.
Women can,
It's so true. And I have said this before, and people get really mad when they're like, are you saying women are incompetent and can't do things? I'm like, no. Do you
no.
think that I think I'm incompetent? Do you think I think Jamie's incompetent? Certainly not. But we're just not made that way. We're not made to go every single day, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and sit in a cubicle under fluorescent lights and like do what, clerical work or whatever, and
Luteal.
not have problems.
Yeah. Luteal is the name for that other
Yeah, the
phase.
luteal phase.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as somebody who's been lifting weights for 15 years, because it does help me with this stuff, it does make me feel a lot better. It helped me with all kinds of issues I was having years ago to get healthier and help my bone density and all kinds of things. And it's good therapy for me, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you are much stronger like in the luteal phase. Like if I need to try to go for a PR, or I really want to see if I can hit a new number on a big lift, I'll do that right around then. Never really try that on my period, because on your period you're a lot weaker than you normally would be,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's a good week to like maybe back off your training a little bit and let your body recover. And like these are things that we just don't learn anymore as women. And I
No.
feel like our great grandmothers, even if they didn't have like the studies, they intuitively knew a lot of these things. And it was just like everybody knew, oh, she's a woman. And it wasn't just looked at as like, oh, she's weak because she, has these cycles. It wasn't really like that. It was more like, well, they're givers of life. And it was kind of just to be respected that we go through different things throughout the month.
Yeah. So different weeks you will need more sleep or less sleep, depending. You'll need more rest or less rest. You're going to be meaner sometimes, and you're going to be sweeter when you're ovulating, and you're going to be more like to the point when your testosterone is high when you're on your period.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
Andrew can tell. I'll tell you that. Like, he's very good at observing me, and he'll know because if I'm being like super aggressive and I'm like, I want you to set me up with a debate right now, he's like, oh boy, he kind of knows what's going on there. Or, yeah, if
mhm.
I'm like, and he knows. And that's why, again, people think it's weird. But sometimes he'll say to me, he'll be like, honey, you should just go take a nap. He's not condescending. He's not being a jerk to me. And he's not even discounting if I'm upset about something. He
Mhm.
just knows that sometimes I really just do need a nap, or like he'll be like, I don't think you're eating enough, and he'll try to feed me or something like that. Because he's like, look, I just notice I've been with you for 15 years, and sometimes I just know when you need a nap and that
Mhm.
you're just upset. And if you take a nap, you'll like honestly feel better. And I want you to feel better. It's not like misogyny or something. But yeah, I think life would be better for women if we knew these things and we knew it's normal. Because I think like my daughters, really, when they were teenagers, they would think there was something wrong with them because they would get like weepy or more sensitive during their menstrual cycle or something like that. And I'd be like, no, honey, that's normal and
Mhm.
it's okay. And once they knew it was normal and okay, they'd just be like, well, I'm on my period, so I'm just like more sensitive about stuff. So I'm not gonna like react and do something and be like reactive about like whatever I'm feeling. I'm going to give myself a minute to like process things and see if I still feel this way tomorrow or whatever. And I think it was just helpful for them, and I think it would be helpful for women to not feel like we should be like men and we shouldn't have periods. And like I just think it's so weird and unnatural.
Yeah. Well, the people on the pill become less attracted to masculinity. And like you said, because it tricks your body into thinking you're already pregnant. So you're like, I need a more of
Safe.
a homey type of guy, right?
Yes. Yes,
A
exactly.
sensitive man. Um,
Yeah.
They can cause vitamin deficiencies, magnesium and mineral deficiencies. They can disrupt your gut microbiome. So we did a
That's
whole
a big one.
show on your gut brain.
Mm-hmm.
Your gut is your second brain, and it's so
Yeah.
important. And all the little creepy crawlies, the good bacteria in your gut, it destroys those little guys that you need. And sometimes you
Yeah.
can never get it back unless you get like a poop transfer or something.
Yes,
Once
exactly.
they're gone, they're gone.
And that is why when you're on the pill, there's certain oral antibiotics you can't take because
Mhm.
both affect the gut. And I do have a daughter who was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum when she was little. And they told me she was never going to walk. She was never going to talk. She would never be normal. She would never be self sufficient. And gave me this like doomsday scenario. And I did a whole gut health protocol with her, a whole dietary protocol. And she went from being totally nonverbal and not even being able to make eye contact to being virtually normal within a few months. It
Mhm.
was crazy. There, I actually wrote an old blog. This is back in like 2011, I want to say, that this happened. But I was told that there's just nothing you can do. And thank God I didn't listen and figured out that that's exactly correct, that the gut brain axis is a thing. It's a
Mhm.
very, very important thing. And so if you're taking birth control and that's affecting it, well, gee whiz. I mean, no wonder we have so many. That makes sense too, why it would trigger autoimmunity, because that's a very gut oriented thing.
Exactly. Yeah. It can give you thyroid problems because of its endocrine disrupting abilities. You are at a higher risk of IBS because your gut is not
Yeah.
functioning properly. It doubles your risk of cervical cancer,
Whoa.
a 20% increase risk of breast cancer. Your IUDs are more susceptible to infection and STD, make you more susceptible to those
Oh my
things.
goodness.
And not just your gut. So they also alter the microbiome in your vaginal flora. So you need probiotics, keeping that thing uh, functioning like it should be, right? So you don't put Lysol up there. Um, it changes your pH balance, and that's when you get, the vaginosis and the yeast
Yeah.
infections and
Yeah.
everything, UTIs, all the kind of problems that
That
people
everyone
suffer
has.
from.
Yeah.
So now we are not going to be using these things with fragrance or perfume. And anything that says parfum, PARFUM,
Yeah.
throw it away.
Right.
Okay. We're not using tampons anymore or maxi pads with the titanium dioxide. Turn over your maxi pad label and look at the ingredients in the
And
thing.
there are a lot of like natural unbleached options out there. There's multiple different things you can do instead of bleached titanium dioxide
Yeah.
tampons.
But and even those little cups like Diva cups and those diaphragms and stuff, I just don't really think that it seems unsanitary to me. I
Yeah.
think you
And
should just
well,
let it come out.
another thing about that too is if you're like me and you've had 5 babies, it changes the shape of your cervix. And so those things don't work very well
Mm,
for those kind of ladies. So,
yeah. And just being able to, bleed freely will relieve your cramps a lot if you're
that's
not backing up what's trying to get out, right?
mhm.
What else? Oh, birth control can make you age faster due to free radical damage. So if there's any thing that we have said that you still are not convinced by, it's going to make you look older. And I know that's the only thing some people care about. So,
Yeah. Save money on your Botox and get off
yeah.
your birth control.
Um, Weight gain and insulin resistance. So you're
Yep.
at higher risk for diabetes. It inhibits your monthly detox. So that's so important because, I mean, one of the things my doctor told me about the period is that, like, yeah, everything, because, like, let's say you smoke a cigarette, all of that stuff drains from your lungs into your uterus and it sits there and the blood collects, and then your period flushes out a lot of toxins. So if
Yes.
you're backing it up, if you're stopping it, if you're inhibiting the flow, you're going to get sicker.
Yeah, and your period is one of the things that helps your lady parts down there keep their natural bacterial like all the microbiome balance, and it's like a natural cleansing mechanism for that as well. So if you're never doing that, it shouldn't be shocking if you're having more infections or odors or things like that as well.
Well, yes, it's a self-cleaning machine,
It is. It's a
right?
it's a really good system. It's
Yes.
almost like an intelligent creator designed it or something,
Yeah. Birth control shrinks your hypothalamus. It
Oh,
throws off your dopamine production. Um, it impacts memory and emotional processing. So there is your weepy, crazy, you know, Looney Tunes girlfriend. It can make you bipolar and increase your risk for blood clots. So we're all
that's
stuffing it.
literally, I will tell you, the only thing doctors have ever told me, and I went to different doctors, different states, different medical systems, and anytime they tried putting me on any type of hormonal birth control, the only question I was ever asked was, do you smoke? Because that puts you at more risk for blood clots. And I've never been a smoker. So I'd say no. And they'd be like, here you go. It was
Mm-hmm.
like that was the only thing. They never told me any of the things you just listed. And I know there will probably be some people out there who are going to say, well, in the context of this and that, it won't always, and there's risks to everything, and blah, blah. It's like, yeah, we know that. But still, these are things that happen. Women experience these things. And I think that the least we could do is have informed consent about what these actually do, and that they do affect a lot more than just, oh, you won't get a period. Won't that be cool? Then you can wear a bathing suit on your vacation and not worry, or whatever. All the different reasons they push birth control on young ladies. But
And this is so crazy. I heard a conversation in the wild in Austin when I was there. I was in the bathroom and I heard that other two girls talking, and they were talking about their IUDs and how they just can't be bothered with a period and it sucks, and they're gonna, do IUDs forever because, it's inconvenient.
yeah, we can't have any inconvenience in the modern age. I mean,
Well, not
why
if
have
you
all
have to
this
work a 9 to 5
science?
like a man. You can't. Maybe you should get rid of your period. I'm just kidding.
Well, that's the other thing too, is it's like this is a large part of why I argue about the things I argue about, because I'm like, let women be women, please. Can we
Hmm.
just be women? Can we be mothers and women and wives and just let us be women? Stop trying to make us into productive worker units. And that's
Hmm.
it's a whole other history book that I'm finishing right now
Yeah.
about where that idea came from, seeing women as economic units or labor units. And this is another reason why we need to pill them up and keep them from having kids, because they need to be in the workplace, increasing the GDP. I had a Candace Owens staffer on Facebook years ago tell me I was a bad American and unpatriotic because I was just being a stupid baby factory and not contributing to the GDP.
Oh man.
That's the mindset of like the TPUSA Republican gals a lot of times, is that you should be out there contributing to the GDP and like being a staffer for someone, and that's what you should be contributing. I'm like,
You
raising a bunch of conservative kids isn't good enough for you? Okay.
You need less babies and more taxes to pay. Why aren't you?
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, and we need you, driving up the labor market so that the wages stay depressed and all these other. It's a whole bunch of things, and I think I love a lot of things about the Orthodox view on like motherhood and childbirth and these sort of things, because there's so much grace for women. Like we have the tradition of 40 days after birth of like kind of rest and isolation for the mother. And let me tell you, oh, if only that would have been around when I was having mine, because it was like I was expected to have a baby and then 2 weeks later get back to work. You're
Hmm.
not just going to stay home with the baby. You've got to get back to work. And people were in my house all the time. And I got sick multiple times because people would come over and they'd bring their friends, they'd bring their family, and people would try to be nice and bring food, but then they would like pile up dishes, and I'd be like, oh great, I get to do all these dishes now. And it was just like, there's things like RSV where if there's tons of visitors coming and going and kissing newborns, they can get very sick. Those first 40 days for newborns are super important too. And it's like, there's a lot to these traditions. These
Hmm.
people were not stupid. To look
Hmm.
back on our history and think that people were dumb, knuckle dragging idiots who didn't know anything is just wrong. And so, a lot of these nice traditions where we have this grace period for mothers with new babies. We have commandments of how husband and wives should treat each other, and that women should be supported all through the different phases of their life, like when you're young, and then when you're married, and then when you're a mother, and then when you're an elder woman, like I'm going into that phase of my life, and you're supposed to, respect and revere older women because they have a lot of experience and wisdom, a lifetime of intuition. These are wonderful things that I feel like we kind of got robbed of when we just got started getting treated like labor units and
Yeah.
medicalized to death.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about, and this is kind of interesting watching what happened in the conservative world this week, and
Yes.
things that people were arguing about, and it had to do with pregnancy and how you're supposed to be treated when you're pregnant. And I just thought the backlash that you were getting is so bizarre because, yeah. So let's talk about that for a second, because if you know what
Sure.
I'm talking about,
Yes.
you can't get away from that. It was a spectacle, and I feel like, the devil won a public battle this week in the case against traditional marriage and family.
Yes, I do too.
And I I watched the video,
Yeah, I did too.
and it's not looking good, bruv.
No,
Not looking good.
it didn't look good. It was terrible, and I wouldn't want to be treated like this. So we're talking about the Steven
Well,
Crowder.
yeah. So let's
Okay.
not
Maybe we shouldn't.
yeah, if you know what we're saying, you know.
Oh,
But
okay.
I had a lot of emotions watching this uh personality, and I settled on gratitude
Yeah.
because my husband should have 2 million followers. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I agree.
Because, it was very unbecoming of a Christian person. Let's put it that way. Right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to say
Well,
things as
certainly.
nice as possible, because watching you guys argue, you don't know about psyops and you don't know about, abuse. And I was going to say a lot more about it, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to praise my own husband instead.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll get the point that I'm making, that because, he makes sure I have all the resources to do the duties that I'm responsible for in our home, which is a
Yeah.
little kingdom according to Orthodoxy. We're king and queen,
Yes.
and we treat each other with respect
Yeah.
as if that was real, right?
Oh,
Um, so if it's a car, if it's money, if it's, he makes sure I have money in my bank account to order the more products that I need, my books and things that for my cream, he takes care of all that so that I have the things to get done what I need to get done,
yeah.
right?
Yes. I have the same thing. My husband worked 60, 70-hour weeks sometimes for about a decade. So about a decade, he like literally physically broke himself pretty much, so that because we did have a big family, and he it got to this point where he was like watching me be so stressed out and so exhausted and like crying while I'm trying to pump breast milk and stuff. And he was like, look, I'll figure out a way. I'll do whatever I have to do, but this is insane, and you need to be home with your kids, and I don't want you feeling like this, and I do want you to raise them and not daycare and different things. And we had been doing a thing where it was like we tried to make work schedules so that one of us was home with them while the other one worked, and it just got really rough after 5 kids. So I felt the same way, like really grateful, but Twitter can be a weird place, and so things got out of hand for a couple days, and it was really bizarre. um it was a weird dichotomy, and everybody had super strong opinions.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't comment on the famous person and his wife video for a couple of reasons. Like, I didn't directly comment or and condemn either side or anything. One reason is I'm old enough to now have seen many times where a divorce or a conflict or a breakup of some kind happens, and a video or pictures or messages or something like that is released for the purpose of making the other person look bad. And sometimes there's context missing or things like that, that later you find out and you're like, oh, well, that does change my opinion a little bit. That's one thing. But the other thing is, that's a deeply personal situation. I don't know those people. And like I just didn't want to, like, first of all, it's just not my business, I guess. I kind of felt like that. But then other people were commenting on the situation in general. Like they were making generalities. Like one lady tweeted, and she's a TPUSA person with a very large platform. She's kind of like a TPUSA babe, like posing with the boobs out a lot and like, here's me with cleavage and a gun, go America, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And she said that pregnant women should get everything they want for 9 months straight, period, end of story, no exceptions, and just suck it up, men, for the 9 months. And I was like, I feel like that might be going too far the other direction, not because I don't think pregnant women should be treated well. I've been pregnant 5 times. I've been pregnant for 4 years of my life. Of course, I want to be treated well when I'm pregnant. Do you
Mhm.
think I don't? But I was like, for most people, most of the time, it's not a debilitating condition and you can still do a lot of things. And I was like, if you have more than one child, it's just not realistic to expect that now your husband has to work and take care of the finances, but also has to do every tiny menial task and rub your feet and do all. And I was like, I just don't. Me personally, I said was I can't relate because I still felt really capable. There was 2 times when I was pregnant that I was limited for medical reasons. Fine. And then you need more help. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we love husbands doting on their wives. I didn't say there was anything wrong with that. I took issue with this idea that we are diamond encrusted glass and can't get off the couch for 9 months. And I thought that was absurd.
Mhm.
And so there were people on both sides just going nuts. And somehow it became about pumping gas.
Mhm.
And now we're calling it the great gas pumping debate of 2023 because this girl said, I didn't ever even pump gas. And I can't even remember the last time I pumped gas. And there were other women saying, yeah, I don't pump the gas. Who pumps their own gas? And I was like, that's a thing. And there were just people with really strong opinions about pumping gas. And I was like, okay, we don't have to turn every tiny thing we do, like is brushing your teeth, a masculine task now
Yeah.
or a feminine task. We don't have to gender everything to death. Okay. Like,
Right.
I'm not a feminist. Everyone knows this, but I was like, well, but why would I like inconvenience my husband to a degree I don't have to? I'd rather he focused on work and paying the bills and taking care of the yard. And it's like, I'll pump the gas. I don't care. And people really got mad at me. I even had men, I had like boomer men being like, I pump the gas around here. It's a point of pride. I'm not going to let my lady pump gas. Gasoline is dangerous and flammable, and gas stations are filled with criminals and crackheads. And I was like, okay, calm down, everyone. 42 years old. I've been pumping
Well,
my gas this whole time and I'm not dead. Like it was just so bizarre, the extreme reactions on all sides and how fired up everybody got about it.
yeah,
But
I
what
can
did you
see.
think? Like what was your,
Okay.
since you were outside of the debacle, what did you think?
I can see how pumping gas could be a courtesy that
Sure.
you give to your lady in
Yeah.
certain situations, like if she's dressed up or if it's your car. Okay, so how we do it
Or
is
if
like,
you just want to. Like if you just
yeah,
want to, and I said
yeah,
this multiple times and people just didn't listen. I was like, if he wants to,
yeah.
that's
That's very
wonderful.
attractive for you to do
Sure.
favors for me.
Yeah.
But it's not a deal breaker.
Right. But yeah, they were the thing that this is what tipped me out, what triggered me a little bit was when the first lady made the assertion that pregnant women get everything they want, no questions asked. And then they were saying, I don't even pump my own gas. This lady said to me and this other man commenting on it, I feel sorry for any woman who has to pump her own gas. And I was like, I really don't need your pity. And you're insinuating that my husband is a shitty husband
Yeah.
because I not because it's like I want him to pump the gas, but he says I have to do it. No, it's just like I'm the one that drives the most because I'm running around with the kids and I'm doing errands and I'm grocery shopping and I drive a lot and he's always at work. So I was like, I just pump the gas most of the time. And she was like, I feel sorry for you. And I was like,
Well,
okay, that's rude. Now you're insulting husbands
Yeah.
And you're also insulting women who are like, I don't mind pumping the gas. I just was like you said, I was like, I don't know why this is a deal breaker. I don't know why this is the hill everyone wants to die on. It's the line in the sand. It was so weird.
What we do is I do most of the driving because his time is better spent on the phone working.
Yes, we do that too. And
Um,
people were mad about that. They were like, women shouldn't be driving. How can you, as a patriarchist, drive a car? And I was like, oh, for Pete's sake.
yeah. So, because we're a team, it's not a weird
Yeah.
dominance hierarchy, okay? We're both trying to get things done together, and it's just,
Yeah.
and he sends me a little bit of money in PayPal if I drive him far. So it's like, a gratitude, it's an appreciation for my effort. And I don't mind driving and I get a little bit of money. And if it's
Yeah.
my
But
car, I
that's,
pump the gas. If it's his car, he pumps the gas. Like,
yeah. And that was like, I kept repeating over and over, but people were so mad already that it just fell on deaf ears. I was like, look, I don't think there's anything wrong with either person driving or either person pumping the gas. I don't think this is a defining issue. Like, staying home with the kids and nursing them, birthing them, like these kind of things. Yes, obviously those are like gender things. I think it's better if nursing mothers are home and dads are out working to pay the bills for obvious reasons. But this is not a gender specific issue, and
right.
it's not a sign of an unhealthy relationship that I pump the gas or drive the car. That is
But
very weird. But there were people who really were like, I had a lady tell me that she was like, "Oh, how could your husband let you drive with the children in the car? That's his whole world. My husband would never let me just drive around with kids in the car. It's too risky. That's his whole life in one vehicle." I'm like, "Who are these?" I was like, "How? Maybe y'all just don't have anything to do? Like, I don't, we're way too busy to like
well,
even
some
worry about
some
this."
couples like their acts of service is, he services the car and that includes gas
Right.
and that makes her happy. But that's
Yeah.
you guys. That's not everybody,
Fine.
right?
Yeah.
We
And I
all have to
told them
figure
that.
out how we feel loved in our relationship. And like, I don't know, going back to this like scene that we have all witnessed,
Yeah.
right? Leisure activities for us are spent together. Not one of us is like smoking a cigar while the other one is doing errands. We are resting together or we're doing our hobbies separately at the same time.
Yeah.
But like because we're best friends,
Yeah. That's how Andy and I are.
everything is trying to buy spare time for us to do fun activities together.
Yes,
I don't
exactly.
delegate things that I don't want to do onto him. He doesn't delegate unpleasant activities onto me just so that we can have more time to do the things that we want to do on our own.
Yeah.
Right? That's not a partnership.
Yeah. And the other thing about this, and this is just me in my old lady phase of life, having raised a bunch of babies, like 5 kids that are in their 20s now, the older ones. So it's just a lot of years of trying to get by. And there were a lot of times where, and it's only just recently let up, but it was like all hands on deck for years because it was just like, we never have enough time in the day to really ever finish everything that needs to get done. So you got to prioritize. And he does what he can do, and I do what I can do. And we both know that we're both doing our best, right? And we really learned a long time ago not to do this weird thing where you keep track and keep score. Like, oh, well, but I took out the trash last week 3 times, and I don't know why this week, you only took it out once. Like, we didn't do this points thing where like I would yell at him or he would yell at me. It's like, okay, he had a really busy week at work, so I'll just take the trash out. Like, I'm not going to pester him with it if I know he's really busy. And it's like, I don't mind, I'll just do it. And he would
Mhm.
do the same thing if he's like, oh man, she's been sick all week or something, or she maybe just had the baby, or the baby's been sick and so she's been up all night with the baby. I'll just go ahead and, make her the coffee and take care of some stuff. Like, I'll just take care of a few things because I know she's occupied. So it's just the spirit of you want to be helpful and take care of the other person. And if both people have that attitude, then you don't do this weird scorekeeping where it's like, well, you have to do this thing. And if you don't, it means you don't love me. There's just like a lot of that kind of stuff where I just feel like if you're really trying to do life together, why do you want to squabble over tiny stuff like that? It's just like he's going to try his best to be as helpful as he can, and I'm going to try my best to be as helpful as I can. And everyone's expected to be working toward those things together. There's
Hmm.
never been this, like, I took issue with the princess mentality of it's my role to sit back with my feet kicked up and it's his role to do work, and I'm here to like look pretty and whatever. And I don't know if that's a cultural thing because I grew up on farms or whatever, but like my grandma, my great grandma, they milked cows. They would go out and back and like hack the head off a chicken and pluck it and cook it for dinner. They were out gardening. They were like rolling cigars to sell at the family store. Everybody was working, right? We're all trying to survive. We're all pitching in. It's all hands on deck. And there wasn't this weird thing of like, oh, women can't do these certain things because whatever. Whatever works for you is fine. It's more about the attitude. It's more about the attitude of like, neither me or my husband feel entitled. Neither of us feel like we're the special person that isn't expected to contribute. We're both working hard toward having a good life for our whole family together.
Hmm.
It seemed really reasonable to me, and people just had such strong opinions. It
Well,
was
people are triggered because they've been abused. I'm not diagnosing anyone, but you have to be aware of how people treat you. I mean, I won't go there. Um, Everything I do around the house is met with appreciation and affection.
yeah.
Um, I've never been like made to do a task that I didn't want to do, you know?
Yeah. I haven't either. It's more like usually it's like a task that we're doing together that neither of us wants to do.
Yeah.
Like when we have to put the pool cover on at the end of the season, it's just a pain in the butt. And we're both like, oh, okay, let's just do it. And we help each other do it. You know what I mean? Like obviously he's stronger and bigger than me,
Yeah.
but he's like, okay, you hold this part of the cover and I'll roll up the sandbag or whatever. So it's just, I don't know. It doesn't seem that complicated to me if you just have the idea that, like you said, your spouse loves and appreciates you and all the things you're doing, regardless of what the things are. And you're loving and appreciating him and all the things he's doing, regardless of what they are. And like,
Mhm.
that's fine. And everybody can decide what they want to do. I wasn't trying to tell anyone, like, no, you have to pump the gas or like, you must do this and he must do that. I was just like, I don't really see what matters if everybody's doing their best to take care of each other. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, respect is something that occurs naturally under the proper circumstances.
Yeah.
It's one of those things you cannot command somebody to do,
Right.
right? It's like a bowel movement or an orgasm or something. Like you can't just say,
Force it. Yeah.
yeah, you can't force it. When my husband asks me to do something for him, it's always very considerate and respectful.
Yeah.
It's never name calling or
No.
shaming or like there's nothing like that. It's always in a loving way, and I love to do things for him because he appreciates it and he asks me in a nice way.
Yeah.
It's not that
Yeah.
hard, guys.
That's
Um,
how it works for us too. And,
yeah,
and that's why like Andy said that too. He was like, "Oh my gosh, the people with the gas." He was like, "I didn't know this was a thing." And
yeah,
he was really mind blown by it too. And he said that cuz like I mean, we get some of the weirdest comments from people, just like I know you guys do about everybody wants to analyze your relationship if you're on the internet. But he was just like, yeah, like, I don't know. My wife is really nice to me. He says that all the time. Like on stream, he'll be like, look, my wife is really nice to me. She bakes me cookies because she knows I like her cookies. And, she's just really nice to me. So if people say something off color about her, I get really mad. That's just how it is. And
yeah,
it's the same way with me. We get defensive of each other, but
yeah. And
we are best friends too. Like we love spending time with each other. Not that we don't love our friends, but if we have the choice, like we'd rather do stuff together 99% of the time
oh,
because
yeah.
we love hanging out. We
I
have
mean,
fun.
if he needs a ride to the store, of course, I'm gonna take
Yeah.
him, right? And he makes sure I don't work too hard. and
That's
lift heavy
nice.
things and expose myself to harmful materials. And because he knows that I'm a hard worker, he's
Yeah,
always telling me, take it easy, don't overdo it,
mine
especially since I
too.
had this surgery. He's like, don't lift that. Like,
Yeah.
so he's always very extra protective of my physical body and not being overworked, especially if I was pregnant, I'm sure that,
Yeah. Yeah. Andy's that way. Same thing. He knows I'll run myself into the ground. So he's like, I'm not worried about you being lazy because that's never happened.
yeah,
But more than that, even I'm a worrier. I worry a lot. And so he's always going, honey, it's okay. He used to do this thing where he would send me that old like 50s or 60s song, like, don't worry,
yeah.
baby. He
Oh,
would
that's
send me
cute.
that song because I'd be like, texting him about something that I'm worried about or whatever. And he would just send that, or he would sing it to me. And then I would think about it. And it would always just make me feel instantly better because he'd be like, honey, don't worry about it. I'm here and I will help you. It's
Yeah,
fine. We can.
yeah,
And I am a person that really needs that. So yeah, it's not like he's terrible to me. And that's why it made me mad because people were insisting that if he's not pumping my gas, he's a terrible husband. I was like, no, he is not. He is a wonderful husband. I just don't care if he pumps my gas. And it's
right.
just, I'm usually the one driving the car. So who cares?
Yeah. And we all have our different like ways to show love and our love languages and acts of
Yeah.
service that we do. And, pumping gas could be for one couple and another couple, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
But,
totally. And I said that so many times and people just weren't listening. But
right. Well, they
yeah,
just
like
have to
my
fight.
big thing, he knows like some things I like would be like, everybody let mom sleep in this weekend and don't wake her up
Hmm.
because she loves a good sleep in. After so many years of being up with babies, I do not feel bad about getting my sleep.
Right.
I'm like, if y'all aren't on fire, don't wake me up. So he'll be like, oh, it's mom's birthday or it's Mother's Day or something. He's like, let's let her sleep and she doesn't have to do any cooking or nothing like that. We'll take her out to eat so she doesn't have to cook or do dishes and she can sleep in. And I love that. That's plenty for me. I'd rather that than like diamonds or something like that because I'll be like, we should put that in the savings. I'm very like practical. And I think that's another thing. It's like some women are, they love like gifts and flowers and romance. And I'm a very practical, like farm person who's just like, well, what am I going to do with a bracelet? Like a diamond bracelet. Why didn't you just get me like a better carpet cleaner so that my carpet cleaning is like, I've always been that way. So it's different for everybody. And that's fine, y'all. It's okay.
Yeah.
Everybody can relax.
Well, I mean, as long as the standard is Christ
Yeah.
as the perfect husband, and I know that's an impossible standard, but it's something we have to hold each other to because we're accountable on Judgment Day for our spouse's, spiritual life.
Yeah.
Um, but so when you're watching people and you're dealing with them and you're looking at idols and people that you look up to, Christ is the standard. He doesn't demand anything from us. He doesn't berate us. He doesn't tell us he doesn't love us. He doesn't make us feel less than,
Yeah.
right? He's very gentle. So just keep in mind, you know, that's who we're supposed to be emulating.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely. And like I just me personally as a person on the Twitter app, um both of the people in that video are someone's parents. Both of those people, are someone's dad and someone's mom. I don't know them and I might have my thoughts about that stuff, but like I don't feel like it's like we always need to give our take on something like that when it's a personal situation that's not our business. Because there's been other times that like scandals will break or something and people will be like, what do you think about it? And I'm like, I don't always feel comfortable. There's sometimes when I do where I feel like it's representative of something, but there's other times where I'm like, look, divorce is really ugly and those people are both these children's parents. So I might have strong opinions and feelings about it. But if I just decide I don't want to say anything about it, and then I'm just not going to. And other people can say stuff about it and we can talk. I like to talk about the general situation rather than the actual person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's fine to say, do you think that kind of treatment's okay and discuss that kind of treatment? But like, I don't attack the person. That's just me personally, because they're someone's dad and mom. Like if I know they have kids, especially, I'm like, their kids are going to see this stuff someday. And that's
Mhm.
upsetting for the kids, even if the person is the most terrible person in the world. Like I'm just not going to say anything about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's totally fair game to discuss the treatment or the actions or the principles or the attitudes. Sure. So that's kind of like
Yeah.
what I
I
was
mean,
doing.
if someone, it's just interesting that we were talking about birth control, pregnancy, and then this came up in the
Yeah.
culture this week. So I think we
Yeah.
were pretty fair.
I think
There's,
so.
yeah.
And there's well, I won't say anything about that. I was just gonna say, like, sometimes there's issues with people. And
Yeah,
I think,
I'm gonna hold back on
yeah,
my deeper opinions about people just because I don't know them. But
right, exactly. So yeah.
I think you guys should look into these books by Randy Alcorn, and these were the ones that were sent to me in the packet from Father Cosmos. And check out Father Cosmos on YouTube. Check out Rachel. Check out my husband, Jay Dyer. Let's get him 2 million followers. Check out Melissa DeCourcy and Kotel, Church of Eternal Logos. Who else is great?
Baselit
Faithful
analyzer,
Analyzer.
exposing powerful lies.
Yes, Richard
Um,
Grove.
if you love the debates, you can go to the Crucible for those.
That's one. PsyOp Cinema guys. I love
Yeah,
those.
those guys are great. It's getting to the point where we have so many awesome creators in our little sphere that I'm afraid that I'm going to forget some of them sometimes, but we have
Yeah,
so many great friends.
Isaac Weishaupt, he's an OG, awesome. He does really good popular culture. And if I can't think of you right now, I'm sorry, but
Yeah, I'm always afraid I'm going to forget somebody and then I'll think of it and be like, oh, dang it.
yeah, Courtney
Um,
Turner,
yes, Courtney Turner.
Rebels for a Cause. Come see me and Rachel in Nashville on June 3rd and 4th. And thank you for the lovely people who sent us these materials and
Yeah.
requested the show. It was
Yeah,
my
and if you guys want like in-depth stuff on that, those books do go really deep and really specific
yeah.
on those issues. So, and
And
they're
start
probably one of the few books you can find that aren't written by like, the medical establishment or progressive activists. So, I think they're a good resource.
nice, nice. So what is next for your shows coming up?
I'm going to do another homeschooling installment about choosing curriculum, and different ways to do that, different options, because people ask that a lot. So that seems to be really in demand. So I'm going to do one about that. And then Courtney and I are continuing our series we've been doing on the history of psychiatry and psychology,
Okay.
which people have been enjoying. So I'm very thankful
And
you guys
one
like that.
one thing I just learned about that is a lot of people who have mental psychiatric problems, psychological problems, could be mold. It could be parasites. So look into that before you start taking brain pills. And check out my new Rockfin channel. And the next show is going to be Kurth Barker's books all about transhumanism and Satanism and blood drinking, cannibalism, and all the stuff that you.
I'm embarrassed that I didn't know that you got a Rockfin channel. I also got one. I haven't put anything on it yet, but I'm going to start next week.
All right,
But
Rockfin.
yours, I'm excited for yours because I'm always like, oh man, I want Jamie to get on a platform where she can say what she wants to say because I feel like it would be so good. So I'm super excited for that.
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. So thank you for coming. I think this was
Yeah.
a smash hit and really fun. And thank you for the people who sponsored it. And have a great
Yes,
night.
thank you so much.